So part two, what I call sort of thank you Tekla and a rebirth of models. I'm fascinated by history and use it a lot in conversations, and especially to explain to my project managers and team members what we're up to. Models are really how we've historically built as human beings. The idea of the drawing is relatively new to people, but whether you study ancient Egypt or in this case more Renaissance models, modeling was how architects and master builders described proof of concept to a client. It's also how they describe the geometry to subcontractors and material suppliers, really not the drawing. The drawing came in early Renaissance as a way for architects then to be at multiple job sites. So they found that if you could do a drawing instead of the model, you could print this drawing on the printing press, which was pretty new at that time, and you could send it all around Europe. And you could put them in books, and people like Palladio could get real famous doing drawings like this. And there's not a model for this building, that's the drawing. So that's what he did. And so suddenly the builder has to go through a lot of gymnastics mentally to produce this building. But that's the course that we were set on. But modeling is still with us, especially if you watch children. They love putting things together. Children's toys, things like Legos and Lincoln Logs, Tinker Toys, are still with us despite the advent of video games. And it's natural to see kids putting things together, modeling. But why aren't people building more models? How many of you are kind of frustrated that a contractor or an architect or an owner isn't buying this? Like they're not more into models. I've heard that from one person over there. You're all okay then. Like that, I've questioned it before. I mean, even my boss asks, like, could we do this without the models? Could we just do all that we're doing with paper? And I've said, no, we can't. Models are essential. But I can tell from the industry, especially my peers and in construction as owners, that it's still not readily accepted. And I'll point to a couple of examples as to why. Modeling right now is still sort of a strange technology because you're still in a building industry that's incredibly conservative. It's changing. I've been in the building industry since 1984, and I started off in paper with no computers. Now I'm in a very different world, but the whole world hasn't changed. And I'll point out, we're still like, these old paddle wheel vessels, which existed in a very finite period of time in the 19th century, where people were transitioning away from sail. They had not got to the screw propeller, so they were building these kind of strange ships using multiple technologies. And that's what our job sites are like these days. You have really high-end technology like Tekla and steel and what you're doing with concrete and prefab, and that's sort of the paddle wheel, maybe the early screw propeller that's at the back. But most of the job site, most of the mentality is square-rigged sailing ships still. And that produces a lot of conflict for us. It's also very similar to the tank in World War I. Yeah, emerging technology that had the potential to change things, and it didn't really change things then, changed things later. And as it showed up, like Tekla sort of showed up for us in 2003, we saw the first printouts of the model and axonometric, and we all looked at it and we thought, this is fantastic. This will solve a lot of problems. And it took us 5 years to get real value out of it. Just like these soldiers really have no idea how to interact with this tank. They can't even talk to it, back then. And it took it, several generations to really have an impact. What's allowed us, I think, more than anything to achieve the savings in time and cost that we've achieved that crate is looking at 3 different levels of thinking with respect to technology like Tekla and Trimble. One is to view technology at a tactical level, operations level, and strategic level. So always making sure that you're not just focusing on modeling something to produce 2D drawings. This was a big issue for us with our architects, who they wanted to use Revit and other products to model, but at the end of the day, they're just producing 2D PDFs. And then they roll them up, print them out, we bid it, we do submittals, shop drawings and everything, and there's no change to the bottom line. So it's like the tank. It had no impact whatsoever. And that's a tactical change without operation and strategic follow-through. The corollary to that is some of these owners out there that say, well, I want BIM on my project, or do everything in Tekla. And they don't understand, how that's going to impact operations and tactics on the project later. So in order to succeed, what we found is you really have to combine these three so that they're tightly overlapped. And once you do that, once you have, an owner that will pay extra for the engineer to model in Tekla, and you have an engineer that will learn Tekla, you have a contractor that will allow you to review shop drawings via the model instead of hard copy, then you're starting to get that overlap that produces value. But if you don't have the overlap, then it's just going to be isolated.